Hiya, teacher friends. Let's talk about beginner level students. If you're on italki, especially if you don't teach English, if you teach Portuguese, Spanish, or any other language, you may have quite a few students who are actually at beginner level. And you might be struggling through thinking over ideas of activities to use with them. So here are 15 activities that I have used with my beginner level students and you could use with yours. Just a little disclaimer, if you teach a different language, you may have to adjust these a little bit, but I tried to find 15 activities that you could adapt to basically any language that you're teaching. Let's dive in. Number one, a spelling bee. Yeah, and I know it sounds very simple, it sounds very cliche, but sometimes going back to the cliches are great things to do. Do a spelling bee and do it with difficult to spell words, or not even difficult to spell, commonly misspelled words, double letter words, or words that we think are double letters but are actually single letters. I'll leave a link in the description below. I've done these with some of my students. Even some of my advanced students get them wrong, and I'm sure some native speakers could get them wrong as well. So it could be a fun way to get your students engaged in actually a non-verbal way. They are listening and they are spelling the word. Or you could give them three options of a possible word, the possible spelling of a word, and they have to tell you which one is the correct one. Awesome. Aside from that, number two, doing a listening activity with possessives. I do this with my students with the topic of family. So for example, I will say, who is my mother's mother? The answer is, she is my grandmother. And you can make this more complex depending on the level, right? So who is my mother's uncle? Who is my father's sister's son? Who is my sister's brother's sister? And basically the list goes on, and you could ask them trick questions and all that fun stuff. Number three, with transportation, show them a map of a town and get them to give you directions. I'll leave a link in the box below with a map that I use with my students. Unfortunately, you might have to adapt this if you're teaching a different language, right? So this would be great for English teachers because they have avenue and boulevard and all that stuff. But at least it gives you an idea of what you could do. You could get them to, well, you could give them directions, tell them the starting point, ask them where's the destination. So they need to listen for the destination. Or if you want, you could write it down and they could read and tell you the destination. And that will expose them to the language. And then they have to do the same with you, the reverse. This could also get them trying out the imperative, using the imperative, like take a right, go straight. Awesome. Number four, different tables with word forms, right? So a lot of students will mix up words like religion and religious, or patient and patience. So you can make tables with the adjective, noun, verb, adverb forms of a word. Yeah, it's not the most fun way to learn English, but it could be a good little quiz to do at the beginning of the class, especially when you're teaching them things like adjectives. And on that note, you could also talk about the different suffixes with adjectives, if it ends with ed, or if it ends with y or ing. Yeah, so different suffixes like that. Impressed, impressive. The list goes on. Number five, I do this with some of my students at the beginning of class. I show them a picture with a series of different pictures of different people with all sorts of emotions, right? I'll put the link to that in the box below as well. And basically, I will take on a persona. So I'll say, hi, my name is Mark. I love partying. I love going to the park. I love hanging out at the beach, blah, blah, blah. They have to go through all of these faces and guess which one Mark is, right? And explain why. Yeah, and then they could try it out as well. So this could be a great way to kind of expose them to emotions and different adjectives as well. Number 6, you could work on prepositions of time by showing them a schedule and asking them about the schedule. You could show them your schedule if you want to make it real, like a real life task, or task them with bringing their schedule to class, right? And you could ask them questions like, when is the business meeting? When is Ryan teaching Alicia or something like that? And they have to tell you on Monday at 5 o'clock, something like that, right? And again, I'll explain this shortly, but it's very important for you to model what you're doing for your students. These activities are for, A1 level students or A2 level students, whatever you classify as beginner. But it is good for you to first give your students an example of what they should do before you ask them to do it. Yeah. And to kind of work on things with them, guide them through the process. All right. Number 7, a recipe. Yeah. Show them a recipe with all of the ingredients, and then practice the difference between uncountable and countable nouns. This is one of the most common grammatical errors I get with my students, be them beginner, intermediate, or even advanced level students. Uncountable and countable nouns. Using quantifiers like much, many, a lot, some, yeah? And understanding all of the rules. Especially when we talk about food, there are a lot of uncountable nouns such as water or salt, right? So this could be a great opportunity for you to ask some questions. How much salt is necessary? How much water is necessary? How many apples are needed? How much pasta? So understanding the difference between much and many, exposing them to that. And then after guiding them through an activity where they have to kind of maybe categorize different nouns into much or many, uncountable, countable nouns. All right, cool. Number 8, using the first conditional. Finish the first conditional. I love this. And you could do this with all conditionals. When you're teaching intermediate level students, you may want to do this with the third conditional or the second conditional. But basically, if it rains blank, right? So if it rains, what will happen? If it rains, I will stay home. Yeah. If I pass my IELTS test, blank. If I pass the IELTS test, I will immigrate to Canada, right? So these kinds of fill in the blank activities could be great. Remember, sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We could really go back to the bare bones of English teaching. It may seem cliche and it may seem lazy, but you actually putting life, putting a voice, putting a character to these activities, instead of having them just doing it in a textbook on their own, could be what makes the difference between real boring learning and very exciting and engaging learning. All right, cool. Number 9, you could practice the passive voice. Basically, we use this in a lot of academic contexts, so you could show them maybe a process diagram, how electricity is generated or something. This might be a little bit higher level, but there are some students who are intermediate who do need practice with this as well, because learning is cyclical. I mean, it's not linear. We don't just learn something and then move on. It's good to do some review as well. So whether it be A2 level students or B2 level students, you could try this out. But working on a process diagram, showing them some sort of process and having them use the passive voice could be useful. Making predictions. I've spoken about this before. You could do this with, for example, with sports. You could show a student the NHL hockey table if they're interested in the NHL in hockey, if they know what that is, and they could make educated prediction on what's going to happen. So this is going to allow them to use going to, right? And if they're not into hockey, show them something about soccer. If they're not into soccer, show them something about tennis, or even a complete unrelated topic. Making predictions using going to could be useful. Awesome. Perfect. Dictation. That's another simple one you could do. You could do this with listening. Get them to watch like a video and just explain what they heard in the video. Yeah. Or you could get them to read something. It disappears after 1 minute of reading. They have to write down everything they remember. Yeah. And you could apply this to basically any level you're teaching. You could apply it to any language you're teaching. Dictation always works. Number 12, using the imperative. So explaining a process could be a great way for this, whether it be explaining a recipe, how to make something or how to do something, how to get to a certain location. Yeah, practicing imperatives could be great. And I regret not practicing imperatives earlier with my students. Perfect. Number 13, yoga poses. This is actually kind of tricky, but again, if you're using pictures, you would be surprised by the amount of vocabulary your students could just pull out of nowhere. Because just the visual stimulation is able to kind of affect you in a way that the auditory stimulation probably can, right? So I show my students a list of yoga poses. I explain how maybe there are 10 pictures of yoga poses. I explain one. They need to tell me which one I just explained, and then it's their turn. They have to explain a yoga pose. This is tricky, and basically there is no perfect way to explain a yoga pose. Even for native speakers, it's tough. Right? So it's not a right or wrong answer, but it's a spectrum of how much vocabulary, and especially prepositions, adverbs, talking about space, talking about motion, and using a range of verbs as well. It might be tough for beginner level students, but it could be a fun way for them to use a picture to try their best to use what limited knowledge they have to explain. And it's magical seeing what kind of ways your students will actually put other kind of words together to explain what a downward facing dog looks like. Yeah. Awesome. Number 14, you could have students match adjectives to a profession. So maybe you could have a list of adjectives and you could have a list of jobs and say which adjectives are necessary for which profession. You're building vocabulary that way. Number 15, you could work with music. You could have them listen to a song or a part of a song and give them 3 options of what the title is, and they have to tell you what the title is. Yeah, just based on the words that they've heard and maybe the feel of the song as well. Awesome. So those are 15 activities right there. I know there are more. I bet that my viewers have tons of them. So please, if you have any ideas, throw them down in the box below so we could all help each other out. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, keep smiling.